Hello and welcome to the channel, and welcome back to a very long overdue Sound Like on a Budget video. Now for those of you who are new since the last one of these videos, and there are quite a few of you, this is a series where we attempt to sound like some of our favourite guitarists, but on a smaller budget. It's pretty self-explanatory, and I'm sure you've seen it before on other channels. But today's one's going to be quite an interesting video, because actually, almost all of the gear that this particular guitarist used is available for quite an affordable price. All in all, this rig that you're hearing here today, I would say is something about like £600 or £700, there or thereabouts. But today we're going to be attempting to sound like a guitarist that left us too soon and that I am very fond of. I'm of course talking about Chuck Schuldiner of Death. Now just before we get into the rig, I just want to preface this and say that Chuck was a phenomenal guitarist and I myself am nowhere near to him. So just give me a little bit of a leeway and bear with me when it comes to the playing on this. I've done my best to try and replicate the tones, mainly focusing on my favourite album, Symbolic. Now depending on what speakers you're listening on and things like that, you might hear some discrepancy, and I think a lot of that will also come down to the fact that these are more raw tones and not in a mix, like you would hear them on the album. But nevertheless, I've done my best to get as close to those album tones as I can. But that's enough talking, so let's actually get into what the rig is and what you heard at the start of this video. So we'll start off by talking about the guitar, and of course Chuck was famous for playing a BC Rich with a Damasio X2N pickup in it. Now I don't have one of those, but what I am using for this video is my modified Aria that you might have seen in a previous video. Now the reason I'm doing this is, although it doesn't have an X2N in it, this is a Seymour Duncan Nazgul. Now I think for me the key part here really is the fact that this is, yes, a high output pickup, but that it's passive and not active. And that plays quite a big part in the sound. And I don't think if you went for something like an EMG 85, which would be a period correct active equivalent, you would necessarily get the right sound. There's definitely something of a less compressed element to this tone that you only can get from a high output passive pickup. The other thing to mention is we are of course in D standard rather than E standard, just to get that authenticity in the tuning as well. So that's the guitar, pretty straightforward, just a high output passive pickup. So let's move on to pedals. Now at this point I'm sure you're expecting me to pull out either one of these, an SD1, or one of these, a DS1, both Boss pedals of course. But actually, I'm not using either of these in this video. Now while it is true that Chuck used both of those pedals earlier on in his career, by the time he started using the amp that we're using today and that we'll talk about in just a minute, he found that the amp itself had enough gain in it to not require an additional pedal. So with regards to pedals, actually all I'm running is also a Boss pedal, but it's a CH1 Super Chorus. Now this isn't on all the time obviously, and this is just for some additional tones and some of the leady bits. If you listen to the recordings, there's often a little bit of a chorus over the top. Now I couldn't find any conclusive information online of what pedal he used for this chorus, or possibly whether it was rack equipment it put in post, but I found that the Super Chorus with the gain of the amp backed off a little bit got me pretty close to what I was looking for. And finally, let's talk about the amp. Now I'm sure a lot of you can see where this is going because there is one amp in particular that Chuck is incredibly well known for using, and that is of course the Marshall Valve State 8100. So I'll just give you a quick look of the front panel. So these are the settings I found myself using for these tones, and really they stayed the same throughout. The only difference being that the gain would get backed off a little bit when we switched over to the chorus. And really for me the key component of this tone, amp-wise at least, is the contour control, which combined with these EQ settings got me pretty close to what I was looking for. And then the final thing to go with the amp is of course the speaker cabinet, because this amp is a head. And again, I couldn't find any conclusive information about what Chuck used, but from what I could see in videos and from a few other sources, it seems that with the Valve State he was just using the standard VS412 cabinet, which from the factory would have been loaded with probably Marshall's own speakers, but something fairly close to a Celestion Greenback. For the sake of this video, I'm using the GGD Zilla Cabs 412, which is loaded with greenbacks and is mic'd up with an SM57 as well as a ribbon mic. So that's a look at this rig. I'll now take you through the two tones just to show you a little bit of what they sound like on their own, and then we'll go through a couple more tracks in a bit more context. So as I said a minute ago, the main tone for this rig is just guitar into amp, with the amp doing all of the heavy lifting in terms of the gain, and that sounds something like this. And from what I've experienced with playing with this rig, it seems that the rhythm tone and the lead tone are exactly the same, or at least that's my take on it, having played with it. So for more leady parts, it sounds something like this. The only difference really with some of the lead parts is that it has that chorus kicked in, which sounds something like this. And then the other tone, as I mentioned earlier, which still involves the chorus, is just with the gain rolled back. I found that it worked about somewhere near 12 o'clock, and that's just for the sort of slightly cleaner parts in tracks like Crystal Mountain. So there you go, that's a look at the rig I'm using for this video. So now it's time to hear it in a bit more context. So check out these clips from a couple of songs that I've put together and see what you think. And there you go, so that's my attempt to sound like Shock Shoulder from Death on a budget. Overall I'm pretty happy with these tones, and I had a great fun off camera just playing through a bunch of the tracks with this setup as well. It did seem to blend in really nicely with the album recordings and was just great fun to play with. And also it's just a bit of a slightly more unorthodox but still very cool metal tone, and very 90s in the way that it sounds. I'm hoping that the sound comes through pretty well on YouTube and that you can hear that it does sound pretty close. But of course, let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on it. But other than that, there's not much else to say than thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.